and welcome everyone to today's patron session. Today's topic is the importance of routing security in the current climate. As we've seen with recent events, resiliency and security is really, really important, and it's important that and obviously it works, and it's important that we keep, making sure that it works and also improving on what we're working on already. And so I'm pleased to invite Kevin Meynell of ISOC, who is the Senior Manager in Technical and Operational Engagement. And I'm going to pass it over to him, who's going to, talk about the topic. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, so thank you, Bijal, and thank you to your IX for inviting me to give the talk today. The talk title is the importance of routing security in the current climate. And routing, global routing system is one of the elements of the internet is actually really critical to its functioning, but tends to get much less attention than, say, the DNS system does, or some other aspects like web security. But I'm going to sort of highlight it. It really is something that people should be taking much more seriously and should be aware of a lot of the issues that are happening at the moment. So I guess I'm talking to a technical audience, so I probably don't need to explain what routing is, what BGP is in any great detail. But I did want to just give an overview of the sort of scale, of the global routing system, and a lot of the how many interactions there are between all of the the different endpoints. So as you're no doubt aware, the internet is a global system of interconnected computer networks, and these are identified by AS numbers, or autonomous system numbers. But in order to get packets from one destination to another, you need routing. There are different forms of routing. You have internal routing, and there's a number of different protocols for that, for example, OSPF. But when we're talking about the global routing system, we're talking about BGP. So this is routing packets from autonomous system to autonomous system. So as of 2 days ago, there were over 73,000 networks that were connected to the internet. As I mentioned, these are identified with unique autonomous system numbers. And then you also have quite a number of IP prefixes which are used to route the traffic itself. And these are associated with the autonomous system. So you can have a number of IP prefixes associated with each autonomous system. Sometimes it's just one, sometimes it can be many hundreds or even thousands. But there are over 900,000 IP prefixes or routes advertised on the internet at the moment. And that's growing. Both of these numbers are growing daily, actually. I mean, literally daily. And if you go back in a month's time, you'll see this will have risen. Number of autonomous systems will probably have risen by 100 or 200, something like that. That's the kind of scale of how the internet's growing. So on the right-hand side, there is a attempted mapping of all the relationships, how the networks all route traffic to each other. It's obviously a bit of a mess. You can't really see much. It's like a sort of spider's web, very dense spider's web. In the middle there, you can probably pick out some of the tier one names of the tier one providers and some of the larger networks. And obviously over in the sort of periphery, there'll be the smaller networks, the sort of third tier ones, the sort of the stub networks. But the aim of this diagram is really just to show, how complicated all the relationships are. So it's not something that individually a human can manage or manually manage this. This really has to be an automated system that's actually working out how all these networks are connected and how you get traffic from one to another. Okay, so what is the problem? Well, Border Gateway Protocol was invented probably 35 years ago, and it's been updated a little bit over the years. but it's still essentially the same protocol that was used in the early 90s. And the problem is that it's entirely based on, well, by default, is entirely based on unverified trust between networks. So there isn't actually any built-in validation that the routing updates are legitimate, so the routing advertisements are legitimate. And this basically means that any network can announce any ASN or any IP prefix, which again basically means that any network can claim to be another network. It can masquerade as another network. So there are sort of three main problems that you see. So one is a route leak. So this is where a network operator sort of accidentally announces to another upstream provider that it has a route to a destination through that route. Traffic shouldn't go that way, but this is usually down to accidental misconfiguration, and this can cause delays in traffic. It can cause traffic to be black holed, but it can also be used for nefarious purposes as well. So, for example, traffic inspection or kind of reconnaissance. And I'll sort of explain in another slide how that's being used in some contexts. Then you have route hijacks. So this is literally where a network operator or an attacker impersonates another network operator. So they pretend that they are that network. And the way BGP works is that it favors a more specific prefix. So attackers can use this knowledge to advertise a prefix, a more specific prefix, and say the legitimate holder, and this will get packets sent to the wrong place. This can also be used for denial of service attacks, and it's often used for things like censorship as well. So maybe a certain government doesn't want you to be able to view Twitter, so they're able to use this technique to divert your traffic to a black hole somewhere. And then finally, you have IP address spoofing. So this is where someone's creating IP packets with a false source IP address. So the aim is to hide the identity of the sender or to impersonate another computing system. And this is very commonly used in reflection DDoS attacks. So that's perhaps the sort of attack that is perhaps you'd hear about mostly in the news. Okay, so this is some practical examples, and these are from this year. There was a very major route hijack a few months ago. There's a company called KLAYswap, which is Korean, and this deals in cryptocurrency. And this was quite a sophisticated attack where the hackers stole nearly $2 million US in cryptocurrency. And the way they did this is that KLAYswap actually used a service provider called Calco. I don't know how you pronounce it, but anyway, and that peers to other networks through the Korean Internet Exchange. I would point out that the Korean Internet Exchange is pretty blameless in this, but it does show I'm going to highlight why internet exchanges are important, play an important role in routing security. So anyway, somebody hijacked a never advertised prefix and then advertised it as a more specific prefix using another network provider. We do know who they are, but we're not going to name them here. But they weren't applying strong route checks or route filtering, so this was allowed to propagate onto the internet. So because BGP prefers this more specific path, traffic got diverted towards the new route. And the problem was they'd also set up a load of fake website that looked very similar to to the legitimate one. So they were able to steal nearly $2 million of cryptocurrency. Now the problem here was that one of the reasons they got away with is that there were no valid route objects registered in an internet routing registry, and certainly there'd been no route origin authorizations have been created. So using RPKI, which would have, probably helped validate that the hijackers weren't, well, it wouldn't have validated, but it would have allowed networks to check whether those hijackers were authorized to originate that prefix. It would have essentially validate the real resource holders. So one thing they can do, and incidentally, not all the RIRs support this policy, but they could have created a non-advertised prefix that's linked to AS0, which would then indicate that it's an invalid route and it should be dropped by other routers on the internet. So AS0 is supported by APNIC. It's not supported by the RIPE-NTC at the moment. That may change, but that's just one technique that could have been used to mitigate against this hijack. So you can read all about this incident in Korean at that link. You can run it through the translator. You get quite a good interpretation. We've also got an explanation on the MANRS website as well, if you're, or more detailed explanation on the MANRS website if you're interested in that. Okay, this brings us to the Ukraine conflict. So early on in the conflict, there were several Ukrainian ministries and a couple of national banks were targeted by cyber attacks. And Ukraine is quite interesting because this saw a reasonably wide-scale, reasonable amount of wide-scale BGP attacks in this conflict. So there was several attempted BGP attacks against the Ukrainian Internet Name Center, which is, I believe, a domain registrar, a large domain registrar in Ukraine. And then there was a attempted BGP hijack of Twitter number resources. It seems that was in Russia. Potentially that was maybe a cyber attack or attempted censorship at Twitter there. So since then, there's been a number of other hijacks which are aimed at disrupting services. And one of the issues is there's quite a few sort of routes that go through Ukraine, some routes from Russia through Ukraine and to other neighboring countries. So it's not, you would think during a conflict that traffic would get routed around this, but this isn't the case. So this is gradually changing as the conflict has continued. And one thing that we have noticed, we were seeing a lot of hijacks in this region, but when we investigated further, what we actually found, they weren't hijacks. So it was actually Russian resource holders seemed to be claiming leased address space. And then this is triggering the hijacked alerts, even though these are actually legitimate transfers of numbers of resources. Now, this would be easier. This would be easier to identify these hijacks because false positives are also not a good thing. If you have too many false positives, you can miss the legitimate attacks. But in Ukraine, there's about 15% of the routes are not actually registered with an IRR, and only 37% of the prefixes have valid ROAs, which could be used to validate the ownership of those resources. Situation is worse in Russia. So there's only, well, it's better in terms of IRRs, but there's 11% not registered in an IRR, but then they only have 24% of the prefixes that have valid ROAs. So the moral of the story is that registering routes and creating ROAs does help guard against BGP attacks, and that includes false positives as well. So those are sort of two examples. There was another example which I can't talk about in too much detail, but it was a large financial provider which was, so we say, subject to a routing misconfiguration, and that caused an outage for about a day, which was obviously potentially quite expensive. So this is really having a real world effect on real businesses that cost real money. And if you just take a look at analysis of what's going on the internet every day, this is analysis from last year. You can see that literally hijacks every day. The one that you can see, I think it looks like in November, that was there was a service provider that was announcing a load of routes, that quite a number of routes that they didn't seem to have ownership of. So that explains the spike in November. And the same with leaks. So these leaks are more common. They're generally not malicious. They're just misconfigurations, or just somebody has typed something wrong. But yeah, again, you have days where there's quite significant leaks, and this is ongoing throughout. Was ongoing throughout the whole of the year, and it would be the case for this year as well. I'm quite sure if we looked at that. Okay, so what can we do about it? So the Internet Society has, for the last about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, been running a program called MANRS, which is mutually assured norms for routing security. But it makes a nice pun. You can use it in all kinds of different ways to gain attention. But what MANRS is about is to bring together create some well-defined actions that can eliminate most of the common threats in the global routing system. So what we're doing is not anything that hasn't been thought of or invented before. This is really bringing together established industry best practices that have existed in some cases for a number of years, but there's just, for various reasons, there's been maybe not a sort of a huge movement, a collective movement to adopt all of these practices. So we've sort of put together this program, which the aim of being, if you sign up to these actions and you implement these actions, this will have an effect on reducing a lot of the routing security issues. So really, it's although it's ISOC supported, this is based on collaboration amongst the participants, and the idea that these participants will share responsibility for the internet infrastructure and take measures to improve the security and the resilience. So we have 4 programs. The original one is for network operators, but there's also one for IXPs, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more depth. We have one for CDN and cloud providers, and then the more recent one is for equipment vendors. So this is really trying to implement some sort of secure default configurations in routing equipment. Okay, so I'm not going to go into huge depth with all of these actions, but just the network operators program. So just to give an overview, there's 4 actions here. Action 1 is preventing propagation of incorrect routing information. So make sure that you're only announcing what you're authorized to announce, but also making sure that your customers are only announcing what they're authorized to announce. That's the kind of important thing. I'm going to skip over anti-spoofing for a minute because that's not a compulsory action, but then we've got coordination. So this is 2 things. This is making sure that you have up-to-date, accessible contact information in a regional internet registry database. You can also use peering DB as well. Some of the reason for this is some of the national internet registries don't have their own or don't make contact information available. So the only alternative is really to put that into peering DB. So you can use that as well, which I'm pretty sure a lot of IXPs will be familiar with. And the other purpose of this action is to be responsive. So you need to respond to communications, and in particular, communications about incidents within 72 hours. Most participants will respond much faster than that, but that's the requirement that we've put in place. And then with global validation, so this is making sure that others can validate your number resources and your routing data. So you can either put this into an IRR, but we really encourage you to also use RPKI and create ROAs for all of this as well, because that provides cryptographic verification of your IP prefixes and your AS numbers. And then we've also got finally the anti-spoofing action, which is enabling source address validation. So to make sure that spoof packets are not emanating from your networks. We've got a very similar program for CDN and cloud providers. It's got a couple more actions, but it's really quite similar to the network operators program. It's just set up for this specific class of operator. I'm not going to go into any more depth in this, but just to indicate that it's actually there. So that brings us to, well, how can IXPs help here? Well, IXPs are really important focal points for network operators and also CDN and cloud providers. And they're representative of operator communities with common objectives. So IXPs can play a really important and active role in developing more secure and resilient routing. So we thought about this, and then we decided we would actually come up with an IXP program, a MANRS IXP program. So this can outline the actions that IXPs can actually take to contribute towards this initiative. The one thing that's different about the IXP program is that the actions really are more about commitment rather than measurable objectives. So going back to the network operators program, I mean, we can measure all of these things externally, except for the anti-spoofing one, which they have to run like a piece of software we can record packets with. But with the IXP one, it's more a commitment. So I'll just show what the actions are. So action one is very similar in terms of trying to prevent propagation of incorrect routing information, but this is really about putting in place a route server to make sure there's accurate routing information available to the IXP members. The other thing is action two. It's a sort of soft action. So this is really encouraging IXPs to promote the MANRS actions to their members and encourage them to implement their MANRS actions. And there's different ways in which they can do that. There's different incentives to do that. So those are the two compulsory actions. Then we've got some optional ones. There's one which is actually about having a policy of what's actually allowed on the peering fabric. So this is what you can actually send across the switch. So it's not actually directly routing related. Action 4 is very similar to the other one. So this is again making sure communication is facilitated. So this is making sure that there's up-to-date member directories, there's mailing lists, there's Slack channels or whatever can be used to help the members communicate between themselves when a route incident occurs. And then finally, there's providing the sort of generally standard monitoring and debugging tools. We do have a tool in MANRS that we can offer, and if I have time, I'll do a demonstration of that. But typically this would be a looking glass, for example. So that's the IXP program. So how are things growing? So as of 2 days ago, we had there were 704 network operators representing 890 ASNs. So this has been a huge growth in the last 2 or 3 years. It's been doubling every year, generally, the growth. Unfortunately, it's not growing as quick as the internet. But actually, the important thing is that we don't need a huge number of network operators implementing the MANRS actions to improve routing security. Actually, a small number, and particularly of large ISPs, will make a very big difference in improving the situation. But the really good figure is that we have 103 IXPs. If you go and look at the participants list, it's all of the ones large ISPs you expect. There's a lot of small IXPs in there as well. And that's really grown a lot in the last year. So we're up to 103 there, which is a really, really great number. And then the CDNs, there's 20 there, and the vendor program is only launched last year. So we've got 6 participants in that, but they are amongst the major equipment vendors. Okay, so that brings me to a couple of other things I just wanted to talk about before I go to the observatory. We do have some other IXP initiatives that we're supporting. I just wanted to flag up that we've been running the virtual peering series for Central Asia for the last year. We've had 6 workshops and we have 2 more planned this year. Next one is in July. And then we've got one planned in October. Should point out that this is co-organized with EuroIX and the RIPE NCC, and we have some good sponsors behind this. But the aim of this is that we're really, we really see that Central Asia is a very fertile area for peering. There's really not that many IXPs there. It's not a well-developed scene. So we're really keen there to promote the idea of peering, to improve local connectivity and improve local, to improve the value for money they're getting for bandwidth there, because it's actually, with maybe the exception of Kazakhstan, bandwidth there is extremely expensive by global standards. So then we also have admittedly, AFPIF is not Europe, but there'll probably be quite a few people in Europe that will be interested in African peering. So we also run a peering forum for Africa. This is co-organized with AFIX. Again, we've got a whole team of sponsors behind that, so thanks to them. And this is actually going to be a face-to-face meeting. It'll be in August in Rwanda. So yeah, have a look at that if you're interested. And then we've also been supporting the development of some new and existing IXPs in Europe, and also in Eurasia as well, I should say. Last year we supported the Macedonian IXP, and that was really important for the country because this was just before COVID hit. So the IXP became really useful when there's a lot of educational stuff. Business had to go online, so they really saw. The timing couldn't have been better. We supported some equipment there, had that installed, and they saw the traffic increase hugely just when COVID hit. We've recently installed a K-route DNS. I think that's just about operational, or if it's not, it will be very soon, possibly even this week. So again, that area, that region, there were no root servers in that region. So that's something that we've been doing to help support improving DNS accessibility. Last year, we also worked with BHNICS as well to establish that. Again, we've supported that with a K-route too. We helped establish the Albanian Internet Exchange. I will point out that that's largely been supported by Namix, so thanks to them for that. But the one we've been really working on for the end of last year and most of this year is the Georgian IX. So there had been a previous attempt to establish an IX in Georgia, which hadn't really taken off, or hadn't taken off at all. So there was a new initiative, and this has got two POPs, one in Tbilisi, one in KLAYswap, which is in the middle of the country, which helps serve some of the ISPs in the western part of the country. And we've been working with them really to try to bring together their community to provide the funding. And my colleague Max Stucci has been really giving a lot of technical advice there to how to set things up, and also bringing potential peers to that exchange as well. So that's really been a great success for us. But the reason I mention this is that we're actually open to some new initiatives for next year. So if you know of anything, we're quite happy to hear about it. So it doesn't actually have to be a new IXP. It can also be an existing IXP if it needs some support. We're quite happy to help with that. So if you're interested in finding out more about the MANRS community, we have a website, a new website, in fact, that we launched only last week. So it should be pretty up to date. And also, if you're interested in getting involved in the IXP community or taking part in one of the workshops, I put the references there as well. Okay, so let me show you the observatory that we have, which could be a tool that IXPs could use to maybe check the routing status of their members, or their members can use to check their own routing status. So just give me 1 minute while I bring up the screen. I'm really hoping I haven't been logged out of this in the meantime. So yeah, if you go to observatory.manrs.org, this takes you to our sort of dashboard that shows you, you can look at how networks, how countries, how groups of networks are doing routing wise. So all of this, this data here, these circles all relate to the actions that I showed earlier. So there's the 4 actions: action 1, filtering; action 2, anti-spoofing; action 3, coordination; and then action 4 split into IRR and RPKI implementation. So you can get an idea behind that. So what you're seeing at the moment is you're seeing the whole of the internet, the figures for the whole of the internet in June. Quite capable. We can go back and look at previous months, which I knew this was going to happen. I've been logged out, so let me see if I can log back in again. And right, there we go. So yeah, well, you can go back and you can check previous months. So in fact, you could see there that the figure, the RPKI implementation has increased by 3% in just 6 months, which is pretty good. So that's, you can do this. So you can also look at these statistics by, say, country. And I'm going to pick Russia for a particular reason. So we can, if I can find it. Here we go, Russia. So you could get similar figures for each country in the world, well, at least any country that has a advertised number of resources, and you can get the figures for those as well. You can do this by RAR region, by UN region. It's maybe of sort of academic interest that. Usually the country information is more interesting, but anyway, that's the sort of the aggregated data that everyone can see if you just come to the website. Okay, but that's all very well. What you want is the actual information of all the networks, and this information is not publicly available unless you have an account. You can ask for an account, particularly if you're a network and you're planning to become a MANRS participant, join MANRS. We can create an account for you. We'll also create an account, for example, we'd be very happy to create an account for IXPs, particularly if you're interested in joining MANRS. But this will give you access to some more detailed information here. So what we're seeing here is apparently over 5,000 networks in Russia. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to pick one. Well, it's not at random because I looked at this earlier. So I'm going to pick MTS, which is the mobile, one of the maybe the largest mobile telephone operator in the country. And I can look at the detailed information for this. And what you can see is, that they've had a route leak here. Incidentally, this wasn't here when I looked a few hours ago, so this is a new one, so I have absolutely no idea what 188.246.288 is. But there was one here, I think, further down, maybe here, this one. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but anyway, there was the number of these prefixes are actually actually, I do remember which one it was now. So it was the bogons here. So this one here, this is a bogon. So bogons are prefixes that should never be routed on the internet. And actually, I looked this one up to find out what this is, and it does seem that this has been address space that's been assigned but then returned to ARIN, as far as I can tell. So this shouldn't be routed on the internet, but for some reason, this Russian mobile provider is propagating this prefix. We're probably less concerned about bogons and more concerned about hijacks and route leaks. But this tool, you can actually find out some information about what's being leaked. You can find that the path through the internet there. And we're pulling this particular incident from BGP Stream, so you can go to BGP Stream and read more information about this. So all this information has been pulled from different sources. So BGP Stream is one. There's something we have called GRIP, which is a system we're developing ourselves in conjunction with Georgia Tech to, it's basically to replace BGP Stream. BGP Stream is kind of going away. It's owned by Cisco, and some of it's being moved to a commercial service, and some of it's not going to be supported in future. So we came up with GRIP. One of the issues with GRIP is it does have a lot of false positives at the moment, so we're still working on why that is. But anyway, then you can come down and you can find out, if you've got unregistered routes. So MTS has 2 routes that are not registered in IRR. You can also find out, that they have 136 prefixes that don't have ROAs created for them. And if you click on this link, you can find out which ones they are. And then finally, there's also, excuse me, the invalid routes. Some of these ROAs are invalid, have been invalidated. You can check which ones they are there as well. So there's quite a lot of data you can gain from this, and you can really check how well particular networks are doing. You can also look at groups of networks as well. So for example, if you're an IXP, you could build a filter for all your members. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to sort of pick on NTCA. That's I think that's a coalition of cable providers in the American Midwest. So you could build a filter for all of your customers and just see how well they're all doing routing wise. So it's pretty powerful tool. Finally, you've got the sort of history there. Well, there's not much of a history for some reason. There were no incidents. It's all doing pretty well. If there were incidents, you would see those on the graphs there. So I think that's brings me to the end of what I wanted to say. If there's any questions from anybody.
Yeah, Kevin, this is Abhishek from NIXI, National Internet Exchange of India. So I would like to know how many ISPs have registered for the MANRS in India, MANRS in India, internet service providers.
Okay. Ooh, difficult question. So not many. I think there's about 2, something like that. So India, well, I'd say in fairness, Asia Pacific uptake has been quite low for MANRS for some reason. But in South Asia, it's been kind of even lower. So we have few members in Bangladesh, some in Pakistan. Actually, Nepal, we've got a few as well. But India is actually, the numbers are quite low, and we'd be kind of interested to know why that is. We have sort of made an effort to, promote routing security in India. We have colleagues working there, but yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure why the numbers are low.
And any IXPs, internet exchange points? Non-internet exchange points, I guess.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think we've got any Indian IXPs part of MANRS, but I would have to get back to you. I'm pretty sure we don't have any, but yeah, I don't want to say we don't without checking.
Yeah, thank you.
Is Nixie joining MANRS? Sorry, that's to Abhishek.
That we have to see. We have to see how many like parameters we will be able to fulfill in the MANRS, and then accordingly we can take that decision on that.
Sure. I'm just doing a search on the IXP database for IXPs in Asia that have MANRS. So there's a search on there. I'm just having a look if there's any in India actually.
Yeah, I'm just doing that too, and I can't find any. So
Yeah, I think no, so no. I can't see the DKIX ones either. So maybe the India DKIX ones aren't there. But anyway, that's if you want to have a look, you can find that on the IXP database as well. It's quite interesting. Once you start looking, you can get carried away and seeing who's doing what, I think. So a question I have actually is, when you talk about the number of IXPs that are part of MANRS, how do you count the IXPs? Is it per entity or is it like per IX?
So we sort of made a decision to, so initially it was just originally just the organization, and then we had this awkward situation where for example, there was an IX that was a MANRS participant, but then was taken over or was absorbed into the umbrella of a larger, and I'm sure you know which ones they are, larger umbrella. And then we had that sort of awkward thing where they would be, well, hang on, some of those are MANRS conformant and some are not, and some are, and so we just made the decision that we do it on a per IXP basis. So D6 is the obvious one. There's several D6 in that, and that was the way to handle that, because there were sort of a lot of acquisitions or brandings, or however you want to call it.
Yeah, it makes sense. And also it might take a bit of time for them to become MANRS compliant, that if there's an IX that's opening a new site or something. So yeah. The other question I had was, has MANRS, have you got any record of whether MANRS has actually reduced the number of routing incidents?
So we've got sort of circumstantial evidence that it has. So when we analyze, so certainly there was a drop in routing incidents this year compared to last year, and they dropped from the previous year as well. And that's sort of in response to an upwards curve in the number of MANRS participants. So you can draw a correlation between that, but it could also just be coincidence too. And it could just be people are just more aware of doing routing things, and particularly creating, implementing RPKI, which could also be having an effect, which is good. If people are implementing the best practices, even if they're not MANRS participants, that's great. That's helping improve routing security as well. So we're perfectly happy with that to happen. So we think it is. The data seems to suggest that. But there's what it's like with statistics and this type of thing. You have to just be a little bit wary of how you interpret them.
Yeah. Have you seen an uptake of RPKI in recent times? And so MANRS has influenced that?
Yeah, I think that has. And I think there's very clear evidence for that. So when we started MANRS, you would say that the early MANRS participants probably had a greater percentage of RPKI implementation than the average network, but it's still very low. I mean, RPKI was around 10%, maybe 15%, something like that at the time. And you look at it now, and 75. So let's say the early MANRS participants may have been like around 20, something like this, or maybe 18, I think, from memory. Now it's 75. And that's only in 2 years or 3 years that this has jumped hugely. But then you've also seen the incidence of RPKI increase globally to about 30% now. So that's come up quite a lot. Now, in fairness, I don't think that's entirely down to MANRS. I mean, I think people like APNIC and RIPE NCC are being a huge push on RPKI, as we have. We've been doing RPKI weeks, things like that. But I definitely think there's been a huge encouragement, and when you see 75% of MANRS networks have implemented RPKI, I mean, I think that's really, really great. Of course, what you have to bear in mind, RPKI is just the first step. You need to do route origin validation as well. But we're also seeing now that more people have done RPKI, you're seeing more RIV being implemented too. So there's a knock-on effect there, and I think that's really the key.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I think in a way, MANRS has made it easy for people to kind of get on that security ladder. It's a stepping stone, like you said. It's because MANRS very easily, well, it simply outlines what needs to be done, so which makes it easy so people aren't needing to kind of root around and say what's the minimum requirements I need to do. MANRS kind of does that for you. So yeah, so it's great work. Are there any other questions for Kevin?
Well, I would like to know whether any plans for involving the government organizations like certain, like any plans or any initiative being taken to reach out to regulatory bodies of ISPs to make the ISPs make ISPs mandatory to implement MANRS. Are we taking any support or we say reaching out to any government institutions like certain?
So the answer is a double-edged sword, I guess, because on the one hand, so MANRS, we're really about encouragement rather than punishment. We stick rather than carrot. Sorry, carrot rather than stick, I should say. Got that around the wrong way. So we really want to encourage networks to do the right thing and explain why it's important to do the right thing. And if they do the right thing, it will benefit them. So there is a role in helping educate the regulators as well, but the downside is they then may regulate, right? And they may regulate in a way that isn't necessarily a good way, as we know with regulators. So yes, we are talking to regulators in some countries. We sort of have to take a sort of very cautious approach in how we're doing that. But I must say, in the US, for example, they sort of favor the sort of soft approach as well. They're not really looking to sort of create laws around that, as far as we can tell. There was a recent, the FCC issued the notice of inquiry on routing security, and a lot of the responses there, and even from what you would say government input, was sort of around, well, we should be more persuasive rather than regulatory about this. So another thing we're doing as well is trying to approach things like the critical infrastructure bodies and the national certs and explain, they can also provide encouragement and promotion and training of these things, because certs, generally tend to be more, they're sort of reactive or educational rather than regulatory in nature. It's not always the case. I'm going to just point out the example of India, but yeah. Again, actually, we responded to that to the CERT India. I think it was like was it an intention to introduce a law or something, which we've responded to. So yeah, we sort of are engaging, but yeah, we just have to be cautious in how we engage.
I got your point, Kevin. So I guess this is the main reason for Indian service providers not being able to implement MANRS, that they don't have any awareness about this initiative. So this is something which should be mutual. Like, we cannot force them to implement MANRS. So I guess the best way to get MANRS implemented in India is to have more and more awareness sessions like this we are having right now. And I request EuroIX to involve service providers of India also in these type of sessions. Obviously, the IXPs do join these sessions, but we should increase the ambit of including the service providers. And though we have I would like to share one of the data is that we have a maximum number of service providers are PKI and ROA compliant. But I'm not sure whether they are aware about this MANRS initiative. So this is something which we as a community should take care of.
I mean, we would be very happy if we can support that in any way. I mean, we've been, we've realized that India in particular is an area that that there's quite low uptake. So we would really like to, to support anything that could raise awareness of that. And, we'd be happy to support you if you were involved in that?
Sure. I will surely take this thing with my management, IXP management, and we'll get back to Vijay on this.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Abhishek. Yeah, I think India is quite special, isn't it? So if we can help out, it would we're more than happy to. Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions for Kevin? No. All right. In that case, I think we're done. And I would just like to say thank you, Kevin, and thank you to ISOC for their continued support and of EuroIX and being a patron. So thank you, and we'll see you all next time.